Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here for our ID Award Spotlight series. Today, we're going to have a great conversation around love fraud. My name is Nikki Bardwaj, and I am the Associate Events Manager here at the International Documentary Association. I come to you from Los Angeles, which is on the unceded land of the Tongva and Chumash people who have been stewards of this land for generations. Before we get started, I'd like to give a big thank you to our ASL interpreter today, Gabe Gomez. And I'd also like to give a big thank you to our media sponsor, Variety, who helped bring this conversation and this series to you all today. Before we get started, I'd also like to mention that this series is available to the general public, and you can find out our full schedule on our page, documentary.org/awards-spotlight. And now I know you're not all here to see me today, so I'd like to bring up our incredible moderator for today, Mara Webster, who's an entertainment interviewer and also the co-founder and head of programming at In Creative Company.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today. And I'm so thrilled to introduce our panelists. We have Heidi Ewing and Rachel Grady, who are the co-directors of Showtime's Love Fraud.
Hi.
Hi. I wanted to dive straight in by talking to you both about the initial genesis of this series, because I love the fact that you discovered this online blog and you were initially very interested in finding a story that, I wouldn't be able to go on and none of the audience would be able to just go on and Google and find the full story themselves. And this blog, it sounds like, gave you just enough information to know that there was something there, but not too much where you would be able to fill in a lot of the gaps. So I was just very interested about that initial journey with this blog and how that felt like the perfect amount of information to build a story on.
Sure. I mean, I'm a big fan of true crime, but I never necessarily wanted to make it. And one of the reasons is that Heidi and I really enjoy and are known for making films and doing stories that are unfolding. So usually it's happened in the past. And that's why it always is excellent fiction, because it's being made up. So we weren't looking for something that was necessarily happening in real time. We had some things that we were curious about. We were interested in bigamists and people, mostly men, that have more than one family, and why someone would do that. And that's where the love fraud comes in. Like, why would you do that to someone? There's nothing to gain. And through that lens, we found the blog. And once we found the blog, we found the women, and we found the bounty hunter, Carla, that was helping them. And really that was enough. But the fact that these women, that he was still out there scamming people, of course, just made it a little more juicy. So, it wouldn't have worked if the characters hadn't been good, if our subjects hadn't also been dynamic and charismatic. But that plus it happening in real time felt right to us.
And what's really unusual about him is the fact that a lot of his frauds and cons happen in person. And the FBI even have an entire division dedicated to romantic fraud, but it's all online action that they're tracking and tracing. And was that something that you were very aware of, the unusual aspect of him as a con artist in that way when you went into the story? Or did you start to learn and discover that his case was unusual and very different to a lot of other ones? Oh, muted.
You're muted, babe.
So one of the reasons that we found this story unusual and appealing is because it was not an online scam. I mean, number one, that's not very cinematic, and number two, it's much stranger for someone in this day and age with the technology that we have to be meeting people in person and moving into their homes. And he takes the con very, very far. It's not like, the Nigerian scam where someone falls in love online and you deliver him money with a bank transaction. This was so old fashioned, it was like an old fashioned love con. And we wondered why someone would do that when there's other ways to scam people out there. We were intrigued by that choice, and we thought it must take a very sick and strange person to actually take it this far and meet the family and ingratiate himself with the parents and promise to put the kids through college. And um, it definitely was more appealing to us because we were more curious about that. I don't know that we would have pursued a story if it were just online. That we would have to really think hard and long, because for us, if it's not cinematic or there's no guarantee of some sort of cinematic journey, we definitely would think twice about it and say, well, I wonder if that should be a podcast. So yeah, it was a major factor in our decision to pursue the story.
Yeah. And then I also wanted to talk about the role that your producer, Alex Ducatz, had in a lot of the genesis very early on, because Alex was also the first person to talk to Carla, the bounty hunter. And I loved hearing about how the two of you were just hearing his side of the conversation. And it would just be things like, okay, so you want to chop his dick off? And then from that, you even before you talked to Carla, like, did you just already centrally know that she was going to be such a pivotal part of this story just from hearing Alex on the other end of the phone?
Right. Well, we knew that it was fun to even hear about her talking to someone. So that's a good sign that she's going to be, charismatic and fun to watch. And she is, she's an incredible documentary film character. She's one of a kind, and she came to this story in such an organic way. She's helping these women. She also had been had a lot of sort of bad relationships with men and really didn't like that kind of bully. So she was helping these women that, honestly, they wouldn't have had a chance. They wouldn't have been able to find him because they didn't have the resource or the know-how to do it. So she was really the quarterback of them, and she was really the quarterback of the story.
Like it had been probably, there's that documentary filmmaker's hope and dream that you're going to walk into a room and you'll know immediately that someone can carry a movie or a series. It doesn't happen that often. Usually we have to do a lot more intervention and edit to keep things moving. But I remember when I first met her walking into the bonding company, she had her guns out. She had she had all these like rude statements posted all over, and like funny bumper stickers and off-kilter t-shirts, and she was so off color, and she immediately started calling us names because they're from New York City. And I loved that. She made it was very provocative. But it really, for me, it had been not since Jesus Camp when we met Becky Fisher that it was so obvious that this person could carry a story. Like, it doesn't happen that often. You just walk into the bonding company and it was like gold. She was like documentary film gold, to be honest. So it doesn't happen that often, and it did with this one.
And with the women throughout the series, they actually, it sounds like, were very open to telling their story and sharing a lot of details with you immediately, because they've gone through this traumatic experience where people have blamed them and been like, well, it's your fault. You shouldn't have fallen for this guy in the first place. You should have known better. And, as we see as well, law enforcement isn't that interested in pursuing their cases either. But within that, were there any questions or concerns or interests that they had in how you were approaching and how you were going to tell their story and represent them on screen?
There wasn't a whole lot of conversation about that. I think, like you said, that they were really excited and enthusiastic that not only was someone giving them attention, when everyone else had blown them off, specifically law enforcement, which a lot of times, when it comes to these kind of domestic, it was, a domestic abuse, really, there's a lot of victim blaming. So they were, I think, really excited that someone was doing it from a compassionate, empathetic lens. And we did not judge them at all. They did nothing wrong. They did what we all do, which is trust people and, hope for the best and want companionship. I mean, literally everyone in the entire world wants that. And somehow they were, discarded because the person that they did that with was a criminal and professional, really, at manipulating and using people's emotions against them. So I think they understood that we really believed that. And that was, it was from a really empathetic point of view. And they just trusted us. I'm so glad they do. And we're always so, obviously no one owes you anything. As a documentary filmmaker, it's always, no one owes you anything. They don't have to be in your film. It's always, a matter of, it's an honor always to tell people's stories. So it was, and I think they really were happy with how it turned out as well. Not just the series, but the whole story in general.
And you touched upon it there, that it wasn't just that he was emotionally gaslighting people, that he was stealing money, damaging people's credit. He also was violent in a number of these relationships. Was the domestic abuse and domestic violence something that you were aware of initially from the blog online, or was that something that you learned about during the filming of the series?
And we learned about it early on in our initial interviews with, there's things that were said on the blog. For us, we had to verify things that were true and not true, and what was hyperbole and what wasn't. Obviously, we hoped the violence wasn't the case, but we found out very early on with our first batch of interviews that he had been violent with several women, and that he was a cruel, cruel person. And so for us, just that additional fact that he had like raised his hand against these women, like gloves were off. For us, we're like, let's go get this motherfucker. Like we were like, let's, we're gonna help track him down. Like we're gonna like put our resources, bring our brains and budget to bear and try to help these women find him, because he's a criminal, he's dangerous, he's on the loose. There was a national warrant for his arrest, and no one's looking for him. Nobody cares. And that really made us mad. And the violence, definitely for me personally, just like learning that was just like, it was just with no qualms anymore at all about trying to help bring him to justice. And so we involved ourselves more than we would have, I think, normally, or more than is expected, from filmmakers in the actual like investigation and tracking him down. And that's a decision. I don't know, like, how would we have made it otherwise? But like, there were so many factors of his cruel and unusual behavior towards these women and humiliating them. But like the violence, the domestic violence part, I think for us was just like, okay, decision made. Like, let's try and help bring him to jail.
And actually, just to add to that, towards the end of our filming, we were deep into edit, and another woman that he had been married to popped up and reached out via the blog, and her story was the worst we had heard. And then I kind of was like, wanted to like dedicate it all to her. She had been so vulnerable, and he had been so cruel and had, attacked her and hurt her on their wedding night, and was just disgusting, despicable person. And she was very, scarred from it, that it wasn't like it got better. The more we peeled away, it got worse. So we never lost our energy to bring this to its conclusion.
And you see, we put that woman in the film and in the series, and structurally we really had to figure out how the audience was going to learn just how bad he was. And so we did sort of like structurally hold back some information so that the experience mimicked our own, which was really learning that this like foolish, like low level petty con artist actually was extremely a dangerous criminal. And sort of we learned that as we went, and so that's how we structured the series as well.
And also in the way that you present their stories, you're not just having them sit to camera and tell us about their lives and tell us about what they went through with him. You're also really capturing little slices of life, little smaller moments of just their everyday as well, to give a really well-rounded version. One of the scenes that I think of still is like the karaoke moment where we get to see one of the women there who's, had initially left her husband to be with him and then was trying to work through their relationship again. And that brought a really interesting intimacy into the storytelling. So what were the ways in which you would spend time with all of them outside of the interview process to really capture a lot of those moments in the series?
Sure. I mean, we try and do that. That's just, part of any film that we would do, which is you want to make people as three-dimensional as possible. And this this series actually had a lot more interviews in it than we normally have. We are primarily verite filmmakers. Most of our films are mostly verite. But I'm glad we were able to, like you said, grab those moments, because of course people are always more than their worst day. So I'm glad you like the karaoke. I like that material too.
And in making this series as a whole and bringing on private investigators, you obviously didn't know if you were going to be able to track him down at all at the beginning of making this, if you were going to have him in the film. And so do you allow yourself to go down different versions of where the story might lead and take you, especially when you think about the fact that there's financial involvement from people who are supporting this? You have Showtime who are curious about where the story's going, but how much did you let yourselves start to try to map out the different versions of what this series could be without ever really knowing where it was going to go yourselves?
I mean, obviously it was a nail biter. Showtime, has a pretty strong stomach, and they, to their credit, were like understood that we might never find him. And so, but still, you want to deliver for yourselves and for your client and just for the audience, really, which is for us the most important thing. But we definitely did have alternate. I mean, we felt that it was strong enough as a series that it would be satisfying even if we didn't find him. At least we told ourselves that. I don't know like how satisfying in hindsight it would have been if we never found him, like, to be completely honest. But we definitely, of course, you lay out scenarios of what material we would have had to shoot more. We would have had to probably go deeper into the FBI unit. We would have had to find something else for the audience to maybe chew on, had we not found him, to be honest. But we did. But yeah, I mean, listen, like, that is like making cinema verite observational documentary, as a lot of the audience knows. It's like you have to have a really strong stomach, because we never know if we're going to have a satisfying ending. We go completely on instinct and gut and character. One of our last most recent films, One of Us, about three Hasidic individuals who are trying to leave the community. We just had no idea where the stories were going to go, and in the end we have this incredible arc with this woman. And so literally, like, it's a wing and a prayer, and you just got to follow your gut, and we just thought it was worth it anyway. But you definitely, we had a couple of sleepless nights when we found him and lost him. That was definitely like, it was the white knuckles at times, for sure.
I think I stopped everything I was doing once we were in the car chase scene.
Oh, good.
And one of the interesting things as well in the way that we see him as a character on screen before we get to the point where you've managed to track him down is that use of voicemails and messages. And it's quite surprising that he still reaches out to some of these women after everything that he's done to them, and still just kind of like wants to keep them on tenterhooks. From the very beginning of your development process, did you know that you wanted to include him as a character in that way? Or was that something that you found along the way as you discovered just how many messages there were at your disposal?
Well, we knew that he has no shame. So he definitely he would keep reaching out. He'd totally scam them, keep reaching out to them and asking them for things. And part of the way he wooed them as well. So a lot of those messages were things that he had left while he was dating them. And he lays it on really thick in the beginning. That's part of his strategy. So, I can't sleep without you, and I think about you all the time, and you're the most beautiful woman in the world, and I want to spend my life with you. And these things are part of his strategy. So there was tons of that. And the women played them for us. So we knew that we would have at least that, you know. So we were trying to figure out ways to build him out if we never did catch him. And that was just, fortunate. That was documentary luck.
I was also really fascinated by the trajectory that we got to see with Lee, who initially, when everybody reached out to her, she was like, that's not who he is. He's been in my life for, 10 years. And up to that point had potentially had a very different experience. And obviously, we see that all completely flips and changes for her once he damages her dad's boat. But even before she was willing to engage in a conversation about that side of who he potentially could even be, how did you go about convincing her to come onto camera? Because it felt like she was the one character in the entire piece that was reticent to appear and reticent to share her story initially.
Hmm. Well, I mean, you have to be patient with people, you know. So we stuck at it, and usually when people do change their mind, though, then she was 100%. So once I did get her to agree, um, she felt like she was people. You know, people feel like they're right, and they want to be heard, and if you give them a platform, they'll take it. So she was a little tricky in the beginning, but then she, I think, enjoyed being listened to, you know?
And then once we get to the moment where you've managed to track him down and we're in that car chase situation, everything's very fast and very furious. But I know that there were a lot of false starts with that. And, you know, you spent a couple of months planning for that potential eventuality. And it even had the two of you kind of crouched down in the back of a car with cameras, not really knowing if that was going to be the moment that you were going to land it on film or not. So in the time that you had to plan for this potential outcome, what were a lot of the details that were important to be able to put together so that when the moment came, you were ready?
I mean, to be honest, we could only do so much planning. And the way it unfolded, we couldn't have imagined that it would turn out like that. It was beyond our imagination, the things that actually ended up unfolding. But we were like, well, you know, hopefully we'll be in the right spot, and hopefully it'll be outside, and hopefully you know, a million long list of things. So it was more like, I think a lot of times for the films that we make and these stories that are unfolding, we kind of invent the best case scenario, and then and then try and steer it that way. But in this case, it was beyond what we could have invented. Everything lined up in this incredible way. It was like the documentary gods, you know, they delivered, and all of the women that had been screwed over by this guy got that moment. And it felt really satisfying. Like we they really they got it was satisfying. It was so satisfying.
It's really a combination, like anything, like all of filmmaking, of like preparation meets luck, meets documentary gods. But the bottom line, we were prepared, and we had access to the private investigators who had access to local police that would listen to them. So actually, everything comes down, as anyone who's watching this who makes documentaries knows, that access is the king. So you have to keep in touch with everyone all the time, and these private eyes had become invested in also capturing him, because these were like decent men who actually, they said most of the time their jobs made them feel a little bit sleazy, because usually they were hired by, cuckolded women or men, and they were, trying to like spy on someone's husband having an affair. And there was like, you just deliver the information and you're done. And this was like, oh, they can actually help bring, be part of the good guys and bring someone to justice. So those private eyes got really invested in the project, and in capturing him. So they were really our allies, in that sequence that you're talking about, which is, the capture and the chase. Now, we could have been shut down. It could have happened inside a mall where they could have, not allowed us to shoot. I mean, that could have happened, but you can only do so much. You have your access, you have your preparation, you hope for a little bit of luck. And that's basically how that scene went down. And also, just to add about what you were asking about Lee, there's that movie, The Stories We Tell. And I think this series could have been called The Stories We Tell Ourselves, because every single person that you meet in the series, probably including Richard Scott Smith, has got stories that they tell themselves they've come to believe as to be true. So for us, it was a really fascinating look into like the human ability to avoid red flags, to not look at them, to not acknowledge what you're saying with your eyes. And I think Lee was definitely in that category.
And then when you reached out to him to see if he would be willing to do an on-camera interview once he was in jail, you sent him a letter, and I heard that he immediately contacted you the same day that he received it saying, "Yes, I'm in." Did you anticipate that? Because at that point you know so much about his level of narcissism. So did you anticipate that he was going to be incredibly enthusiastic to talk to you?
You know, you never know. You never know. Someone could be understand that anything they say incriminates them, or they can think that they are so good at what they do that they can convince anyone of anything. So we had no idea. But when he called back immediately and he said, "I need to set the record straight. I need to give you my side of the story," we knew that we were in for a ride, a crazy ride, because there was not that much he could say to explain his behavior. So we were, we buckled up and we're like, "Okay, dude, tell us," and just interviewing him was one of, like, I think Heidi and I, one of the more satisfying interviews of our career.
And what we're seeing on screen in about 20 minutes is distilled down from a full, like, 2 or 3 hour conversation with him. And it really gives such a sense of what that entire time with him must have been like. It's got the, "I'm crying because I'm the victim, I'm trying to emotionally manipulate you." He does a lot of language tactics with you both. I noticed that he was using your names a lot to try and create that direct connectivity and to pull you in. And then there's him just trying to change the topic or speaking to something that's completely unrelated to what you've asked him. And were there any other kind of like facets that he was bringing into the conversation, or is what we're seeing really like every single tactic that he was trying on you throughout that entire time?
Tried to include as many tasks as we could, and you basically, we run the gamut. You would kind of capture them just in your description right now. He cried a lot more than we show. He would not stop blubbering. It was just a problem. It was just like that. He really relied on that tactic a lot because it must have worked in the past with women. I don't want to sound like I couldn't stop laughing at times because it was so obvious that he was trying to con us. Like,
Yeah.
crocodile tears, man. It was just like, I can't believe this shit worked on everybody. Like, like, wipe your nose and tell us how it went down. Like, there was a lot more of that than we could show, which was like actually kind of hard to edit around. But no, I think we tried to really look at the reason it's 20 minutes is because it's, of course, it's not uncut, but it's really like we really tried to give as much as we could to the audience because it's just like it was their turn, it's your turn to sit with him and in the way that we did and analyze him from your sofa, and which is fun, and just to be like, what's he up to? Where's he going with this? And it just, we really wanted to allow the time, and that's never really done where you sit with someone uncut for so long, but we really felt like he could carry the day, and that we kind of owed it to people after sitting there for 4 hours to like kind of make their own call with this guy, and so that's why we ended up doing something which is sort of radical, I guess, in like the episodic, what in the documentary series style, which is to like just let it rip. But I don't know, Rachel, what else did he do that was like, I mean,
there was a lot of crying and there was a lot of blaming women, trying to come up with ways to show that it was really their fault. And, a lot of the women that we had spent time with, and we were really not interested in exploring that a lot. It wasn't necessarily, he was busted. He was guilty and busted, and he had no excuse really for his behavior. But even within that context, we wanted to know why. I mean, really, and we really never really got to why. Because, like you said in the beginning, you don't have to do this stuff in person. So if you're just interested in ripping someone off for money, you don't ever have to meet them. So if you meet them, you're doing it for another reason. And we were always like, what's that reason? What is that reason? And I don't think we got an answer necessarily to that question. Especially like in this interview, he was trying to blame them. So basically he was saying, I didn't do it. He was just lying to her lying to us a lot. So we took a lot of that out because it seemed tedious. But you know, we kind of synthesized the most satisfying bits, you know, that would kind of told the arc of the story. He was cornered, you know, in that interview. He was really cornered, and it was wild. It was wild to have thought about this person and spied on this person and talked to all these people in his life, and then hear him. You know, we knew so much about him. So it was like, you know, we had done this graduate school level analysis of this individual, and then we finally got to talk to him.
It sounds like during that time with him as well, that there were a couple of moments where there were brief breaks to step away from him. And within those moments, with those reprieves, was that an instance of being really grateful that you had each other as co-directors to be able to kind of regroup and re-strategize and figure out how you were going to go back in and continue this conversation to try and get what you wanted out of it?
Yeah,
sure.
Two-man job. It was a two-woman job because, you know what I mean? He was like, he would start scrambling, going in circles and kind of trying to scramble our own brains. And it was not really working, but it was good to have someone else listening back who wasn't actually having to look at him in the face, and to really see if we were getting anywhere, and just to you know, to go back and re-question him on things that he had, like, you know, sort of skipped over. It was good to have, you know, the both of us sort of keeping track. Also, the reason we stepped away from the camera often was because we like to film people in their own environment when they're not performing. And one of our techniques is to roll the camera, you know, always be rolling. And I think you learn a lot about him in the times that we walked away and kept rolling, because he was also, you could see his brain recalibrating and trying to see how he was doing. And, you know, his face would change. And I thought that was also intentional for us to step away for minutes at a time to allow the camera to sit with him alone. And we used a lot of those moments, and they're quite telling. They're quite telling in his case. Yeah.
One of my favorite moments in that entire conversation as well is the moment where you start asking him about how many people have you been married to, what are their names, what was the order, and he, you know, he's done this so much that he can't even keep track of it himself. Was that a question that you went in having planned and thought about, or was that something that came up in the conversation as an idea to try and pin him on?
No, I mean, what we had done is we had gathered as many of the wedding certificates as we could find. It's actually quite hard to find wedding certificates. There's not some sort of central organizing, you know, principle to marriage in this country. It's like by county by county. So we had found, I think, 11 of them. So we felt very like we could be very methodical because we had proof of things. So we knew we wanted to talk to him about that, because that was something that no one had ever gotten a straight answer from him. But the way it unfolded, obviously we couldn't have guessed that it would have been so weird.
And obviously he said yes to being on camera with you straight away, but then there's a lot of logistical challenges with filming in a prison. And what are a lot of those hoops that you had to jump through in order to be able to bring cameras in and to come in and sit down with him in the way that you did?
You know, one of
our executive producer, Amy Goodman, Cass, she had a lot of experience filming in prisons, jails. And, you know, it's just about being dogged and being buttoned up and persistent and going up the chain of command. And I think it took her a while. It took her a couple months to get everything set up.
Different rules too. And like sometimes you can't go in at all, depending on sometimes it's the warden, sometimes it's the county. In this case, we weren't allowed to be physically in the same room with him. So we did the Interrotron. We were like a couple of doors down, but we could see each other through a screen. It actually worked out ideally for us because we didn't necessarily need to be in the same room with him. It just, you know, it allowed us to do what I said before, which is to walk away, to regroup, to talk to each other without him. So but that was the rules. We just had to like run a bunch of cables. But, you know, that happened. Where was that? Iowa? Where we were in Iowa?
It was Iowa, yeah. Des Moines.
Yeah. You know, it could have gone the other way. They could have said, sorry, we don't allow such a thing. So, you know, Amy Goodman-Cass did an amazing job. persuading everyone that we wouldn't be a bother and that we would obey by their rules. But like you see how many obstacles lie in your way even after somebody wants to participate. Like his lawyer could have stopped it short, and then the county could have stopped it, the prison authorities could have stopped it. I mean, it's just like it goes on and on and on, which makes documentary filmmaking like a very like a dangerous profession. You know what I mean? Because a yes can turn into a no.
It's a miracle that any of them get made, honestly.
That any of them get made. Well, anything with any real people that's not a historical film, for sure. Yeah.
And jumping back a little to how you're really trying to answer the question as to the why of it all with him. You have some exploration of his family history within the series as well. And again, was that something that at the beginning of development and looking into him as a character that you already started doing that digging and felt was really important to be able to include, to give a little bit of his backstory and uncover that side of him for us?
And for me, it was really important. I wanted it to be more than just like some sort of procedural. I was interested really in the psychology and looking for an answer of why someone would be so cruel for no apparent upside. In fact, it was only a burden for him to rip people off by the way he was doing it. So we didn't get a lot of answers there either. I mean, did he have a bad childhood? What was the inciting incident? We were looking for that, but we never really we couldn't find it. But I think it was important for us to do that exercise. I was very, I thought it was really important just to give it another layer.
Also, we thought that the family was really interesting, and especially the aunts and Uncle Wally, because we wanted to show that a love fraud is not just romantic love. A love fraud is familial love. A love fraud is betraying somebody who's known you since you were a child, who loves you, and you're still going to steal from them. You're still going to rob them. It's like, these are, people don't recover from that kind of betrayal. And I think you could see it on the faces of these women that loved him so much. This is like flesh and blood. And yet he flippantly robbed them and lied to them. I mean, for us, that was like, that's probably the reason that this backstory material ended up in the series, because as Rachel said, it's not that we found an aha moment, but we realized that this sadistic behavior, he didn't reserve it just for his romantic encounters. It was for everyone.
And his sentence was relatively short, and we see at the end of the series that he immediately goes back to doing everything that he was doing before, and absolutely nothing has changed. Did you anticipate that was going to be the case immediately, and already have plans to continue trying to find him and follow him when he got out, to see if that was definitely going to be the situation and that you could include that?
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't imagine any world in which he wouldn't do exactly why would he not? I mean, there's something wrong with him. And whatever that is didn't get fixed. So I think it's the only way he knows how to behave. So we had this idea, like maybe we would check in and see what happens. But the fact of the matter is we filmed him one time, and that's what we found. So it wasn't hard. It wasn't hard to come to that conclusion. It's not like we had to spend months and months tailing him. It was, one afternoon.
Yeah. And with the women, I love that you made sure to capture that sense of kind of, they finally have this feeling of validation for everything and the stories that they've shared. And I really enjoyed that moment where you have almost those brief like video portraits of them all in front of the neon sign, and was just interested about how that came together and what that looked like in filming that moment with them all.
It was very spontaneous. I mean, they just all were at Carla's doing planning something, or they just would get together for wine or whatever and kind of go over stuff and talk about the blog and talk about other women. And we wanted to film one of those get-togethers, and we did. And we were there, and the neon was there, and we just started taking portraits of them. And it was it wasn't planned, but it was, it worked, I thought, really well. The spirit of them.
all of your documentaries are always so incredibly phenomenal and always have such fantastically unique stories. And in particular, with the making of this series, what tools and skills did it uniquely give you the opportunity to either develop or evolve for yourselves as filmmakers?
I think this one, wow, that's a really good question. I mean, you always grow. Every time you start a film, it's like you don't know anything and you're starting from scratch. And then as you go on, you realize you're bringing all your skills to bear. I think this one took an incredible amount of patience and confidence that there was a story to be told. Like we said, even if you didn't find him, we also were able to lean in this time a lot on like a little bit of madcappery. I don't know if that's a word, but the strangeness of the scenario, the humor, the funny characters, like we have a lot of fun where people think we're funny, like socially, like we're a good time. But our films are usually, they're dramas, they're dramatic documentaries. And so we really hadn't had an opportunity to apply our winks and our nods and our personality to a project like this. And so, we didn't really call it true crime, we called it true con. And there was a little bit of whimsy to this series that I don't think that we were able to really express in previous work. So I would say it was really fun to scratch that itch, and to sort of uh, be a little bit looser, with the humor and stuff. So I think that's something we hadn't done, and we hope we can do that again if we find the right project.
Definitely. Yeah, we had a good time. We had a good time with this one.
Amazing.
There was enough heart, and it mattered, and I had empathy and I felt for the women, and but it was also, there was parts of it that were just ridiculous and absurd. So it's unusual that you get to marry those two things.
Well, it's such a phenomenal and fantastically made series, and you did such a fantastic job with it. So congratulations on all of that. And thank you so much for sharing all of
Thank you
this.
so much. Thanks. That's so kind of you. I'm glad that you liked it.